To begin today, I want to talk to you a little bit about one of my favorite television shows, and I bet I'm not the only person in the place who loves the Andy Griffith Show. Can I get a feel for that? And one of the reasons, I love Andy Griffith, one of many, is that Andy Griffith always reminded me of my daddy. Unfortunately, there's also a character on the Andy Griffith Show that people used to tell me I reminded them of. You guessed it, Gomer Pyle. Gomer Pyle, I was told that 15 years ago. It's come up more than once. But in recent years, there's been a shift. And more people are saying I remind them of Andy Griffith. Now, wouldn't you agree? Can I see a hand for Gomer Pyle? 2, Andy? Oh, thank you. Well, I'm not going to ask about Barney. We're coming to Barney, though. The thing I love, one of the other things I love about Andy is his relaxed approach to life. Just very relaxed. Some of my favorite scenes are Andy on his front porch at night, kick back with his guitar, just kind of playing, humming an old tune. And he's a joyful person, and he seems to bring joy to other people, and of course that's the way it works. Joy is contagious, just like hate is contagious. But Andy had a theme song that fit him perfectly, and you know how that goes. Got it? Doesn't that just cheer you up? To hear that, I need to find a way to make that my ringer on my telephone. Andy just so relaxed, and he's easy going in his dealings with people, except in those cases where he's dealing with a real sure enough crook. And in those cases, even Andy will put on a gun. You've seen those, but most of the time, very, very laid back. Barney, on the other hand, serious business, Barney, also known as Fast Gun Fife. Fast Gun Fife was hard on crime. He was not lax on anybody for any reason. Well, I remember one episode when Andy woke up in the morning, went to Mount Pilot for the day, left Barney in charge. And when Andy came rolling back into town that afternoon late, he saw Barney standing out in front of the courthouse with a very proud look. And Andy walked into the courthouse, gazed over at those cells, and they were slam full of Mayberry citizens. I mean, everybody. The mayor, Floyd the barber, Gomer was in there, even Opie and Aunt B. Mercy, Aunt B. Mercy. Aunt B was in there. Well, you know, the first thing that Andy did was take that key and let them all out. It was pretty easy to break out of the cells at Mayberry, by the way. Do you remember how they were set up? There were only 2 of them, with one brick wall in between. And let's say you got a cell here and a cell there. Here's the wall running this way, and the big cell, all you got to do is reach through and get them. Unlock yourself. And there were 2 main reasons for that. One was so that whenever town drunk Otis got a snoot full and didn't want to have to go home and face his wife, he'd come in, let himself in the jail. Next morning after he slept it off, he'd let himself out. But there was an even more important reason for having that extra set of keys hanging close by, and that is that on certain occasions there were accidental lockdowns. And there was one person in particular who seemed to accidentally lock himself up over and over again. Like the time Andy caught some boys who broke a window. Opie was among them. And Andy talked to them, said a few words about how they needed to act and how they didn't need to act. But Barney said, wait, Andy, let me say a few things. And he launched into this lecture about crime and where they were headed. And he talked about bud nipping, I think. You know what I mean by bud nipping. You had to nip it in the bud. You can consult any manual you want on childhood psychology and find they all recommend bud nipping. So Barney was nipping it in the bud when this scene unfolded right there.
Boys, these are our maximum security cells. This is where convicted persons are inoculated.
Incarcerated. Inoculated. You like where the doctor gives you a shot?
Oh, they know what I mean. Yes, boys, take a good look. This is the last stop on the road of crime. A man confined to prison is a man who has given up his liberty, his pursuit of happiness. No more carefree hours. No more doing whatever you want, whenever you want. No more peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. A man in prison is under 24-hour surveillance. All his activities laid out for him until he has paid his debt to society. Yes.
Why can't you have peanut butter in prison?
Where did it all begin?
Barney.
It began one fine day on a street corner when he broke a street lamp.
Barney.
Where did it all end? Right here. Yes, take a good look, boys. Because it definitely is no fun when that iron door clangs shut on you. It definitely is no fun.
No, it is no fun when the iron door slams shut. But Andy had a lot of fun whenever those kinds of things happen. But the main difference I want to draw to your attention, the thing that I most want you to see, is that Andy Griffith seemed to be always trying to keep people out of jail. And if they were in jail, he was trying to find a way to get them out of jail. Whereas Barney was always looking for a good excuse to put somebody in jail. So right there with Andy and Barney, you see two types of people. Unfortunately, these are two types of Christians. Those of us who, like Barney, are always looking for an opportunity to find out that somebody did something wrong so that we can make sure they pay for it. If nothing else, they'll pay for it by loss of their reputation. Because all it takes is a few words from a tongue out of control. All sorts of ways to make other people pay when they do something that we find offensive or wrong. That's one kind of person. That's the Barney. And there's the Andy. Thank God for the Andys. The Andys are the real Christians in the sense of Christ-like. Because they do everything they can to keep people out of sin. And do everything they can to lift people up when they've fallen, rather than walk on by sneering. And the Andys of this world always find a way to set people free. Jesus was about setting people free. Peter, on the other hand, he sort of liked to hear that iron door slammed shut. Let me show you what I mean. This is Matthew chapter 18, beginning in verse 21. Then Peter came to him and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? No, not 7 times, Jesus replied, but 70 times 7. 70 times 7, that's a lot. It's especially a lot when you consider that during that time, the Jewish rabbis had a formula for determining exactly when it was time to lock somebody away and let the iron door slam shut. And that was a very simple formula. 1, 2, 3, and you're out. They sin against you 3 times, boom, you're under no obligation to forgive them. You are done with them. You can cut them out of your life. You can cut them to pieces with what you say about them. 3 strikes and you're out. That's the way the religious leaders saw it. So Peter, he thought he was going to be extra generous because he took that 3 and he doubled it and added another to it, 7. And he thought he was really going to impress Jesus. How many times should I forgive somebody that sins against me? 7 times? No, Jesus said 7 times 70. Now, how are you at arithmetic? 70 times 7, what is that? 490. Exactly right. That is the arithmetic of the head. And the head, the intellect, wants to keep track all the way up to 490 if necessary. You can use the arithmetic of the head, or you can use the arithmetic of the heart. Because in the arithmetic of the heart, 70 times 7 is just a way of saying you never stop. Because God never stops. Thank God, God never stops. Talk about things to be thankful for. My goodness. If God had only been willing to forgive me 490 times, by the time I was 21, I'd have been done for. With no hope of ever having a right relationship with God. But thank God, God loves sinners. He hates sin, but he loves sinners because he knows that sin hurts sinners and the ones sinned against. He loves sinners, though, and he loves to set them free, even when they deserve a maximum security cell. And I bet you there are some of us here today who feel like that's what we deserve. But by the grace of God, the gospel says you don't get what you deserve. You get the arithmetic of the heart. Now here's another thing about forgiveness and sinning against another person or sinning against God. When we're dealing with another person, especially one who repeatedly sins against us, first of all, I do want to clarify that there is a difference between being forgiving and merciful and being an enabler. And I do want to make sure you know the difference. I'm not going to talk about enabling today. That's not the sermon, but I just want to clarify for you. It is possible that when you find a person who's in this self-destructive lifestyle, and no matter how much you give them, it's never enough because they're going to waste it. No matter what you do for them, it's not going to really help them because all it does is enable them to hurt themselves and others even more. We're not talking about enabling. We're talking about people who really do need to be forgiven. Sometimes because they are repentant and they really want our forgiveness. And other times We got to forgive them, because if we don't, we're going to be the ones behind an iron door that slams shut. We'll be in a prison of our own making, a prison of bitterness, prison of hate that just goes on and on and on. Forgiveness, there is this sense that when we are sinned against, somebody needs to make something up. Need to make it up. Have you ever sinned against another person, hurt them really bad, and immediately start asking, what can I do to make it up? Fortunately, there are times you can. There are times that you can give back that which was taken. Other times, though, say with a rumor, they say a rumor is harder to unspread than butter. A rumor, you can't take it back, but you can make it a point to clarify and acknowledge where you were wrong to the people you shared that rumor with. But when it comes right down to it, even though we want to make amends, we want to make things right, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't. It's just impossible to pay back, to undo. And that is why we need complete mercy. And that's what Jesus is describing in the parable that follows this saying in Matthew 18, 1 and 2. Verses 23 to 25. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars he couldn't pay, so his master ordered that he be sold along with his wife, his children, and everything he owned to pay the debt. Man, you talk about a debt that you can't pay back. Owing something that is going to crush you. You know, in some translations, it says the amount was 1 million talents. Talent was a unit of money. 1 million talents is what he owed. Do you know that the entire imperial taxes for Judea and Samaria were only 600 talents? This man owed 1 million? No way, no way. You're going to ever be good enough to pay this back. The only hope is that God's going to be merciful. Verse 27. But when the man, let me insert this first. This man begged forgiveness. He asked forgiveness, and God granted it. He went away clean. He went away with a fresh new start, but he made a big mistake. Verse 28. When the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s, grabbed him by the throat, and demanded instant payment. Verse 29. This fellow servant fell down before him and begged him for a little more time. Be patient. But he wouldn't wait. Had him arrested and put in jail. But somebody went and told the king about what had happened. And this is verse 32 to 35. Then the king called in the man he had forgiven and said, You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. Other translations say he turned him over to the tormentors. What does it mean to be turned over to the tormentors? Most likely, that's got some tie to the life to come. But if you know what it's like to live in unforgiveness, if you know what it's like to hold a grudge year after year after year, or if you know what it's like to be the person who did wrong and you wish you could take it back, but you can't, and they just won't forgive you. You know what a hell it is. You know what torment it is. And there are times when we refuse to forgive, we're basically turning ourselves over to the tormentors. We're asking for misery. We're asking to have an iron door slammed shut on us where we sit and stew in our own poison. That's why it's so important that you forgive. Do you know what it's like? Those of you who need to forgive someone, maybe it would help if you put yourself in their place. The person who wants to be forgiven, but people just won't leave it alone. It might have been 20 years ago. And they may have totally changed, but people still just remember what they did 20 years ago. Listen, if you got a grudge against somebody and it happened over 5 years ago, you know what? The person you're mad at is not even alive anymore. Because we change, we grow. The person who did you wrong 10 years ago is not the same person that goes by that name and wears that face now. They've changed. And if they've changed for the better, you got to be willing to forgive. I know what it's like to not be forgiven. I had a really good friend in Muskogee, Oklahoma. He's one of the first friends I made there. We bonded. We spent a lot of time together. We would go shooting. We'd go hiking. We just talked about life, talked about God. Then his wife came to work at our church, the church where I was a pastor. And one day, I was in a bad mood. I was upset because of some conversation I had just finished having. And I passed her in the hall. She said something I don't even remember, and I made a smart comment back. As soon as I made it, I wished I could take it back. She swelled up and just walked off. Next day, I got a text. And so we talked. And I said to my friend, listen, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'm not going to make any excuses. There's no, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry. Would you please forgive me? And he just sort of folded his arms and I appreciate you saying that. You know, he never spoke to me again that I recall. I'd send him a card here and there. I'd send him a funny text. He never responded again. Even stopped coming to church. And there was nothing I could do to make him forgive me. There are people who want to be forgiven, and you're keeping them out of your life. You're keeping them behind bars, and it's time to set them free. I mean, when a person, if you're one of those people who is still bringing up to your spouse, for example, something that happened 3 years ago or 13 years ago, I mean, somewhere there's got to be a statute of limitations on something like that. Unfortunately, there's not. God allows us to keep going. He allows us to put ourselves in a shell, in a cell, I meant to say. Now I got to say this. There are people in your life. There are people in your life who did wrong, and you want to forgive them, and you really would, except there's one problem. They haven't asked. Maybe they don't even admit they did wrong. What if they don't even acknowledge that they did anything at all? How do you forgive a person like that? Well, you have to do what Jesus did. And you learn to do what Jesus did as you grow more and more Christ-like. You recognize that that person is simply not mature enough, spiritually or emotionally, to admit when they're wrong, and they're not mature enough and big enough to acknowledge it to you and ask forgiveness. They simply are too small. And when you realize that, it's easier to understand how Jesus could hang on the cross, look down at those who put him there and say, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Truer words were never spoken. Those people who put him there, they didn't know what they were doing. They were on such a low level of understanding, such an immature type of religion. They didn't know what they were doing. Chances are the people who hurt you the most did not know what they were doing either. And if you don't forgive them for their sake, please forgive them for your sake. Because if you insist on holding on to that, if you keep those iron doors shut, you're not going to grow as a Christian. You are going to stop right there. All development probably stopped in some of your lives the day somebody sinned against you and you couldn't forgive. It's very likely that if you didn't forgive, you haven't grown much since then, if at all. Listen, don't be a Barney. Don't be a Barney. You see that face? It's no fun when those iron doors slam shut. Stop slamming those doors on other people. And reach outside and get the keys and let yourself out through forgiving others. You know, God's a lot like Andy in one other way. Andy kept this keys to freedom just within reach. So does God. The key to your freedom is closer than your heartbeat. It's in you. It's above you, beneath you, and all around you. It's the Spirit of Christ. The Christ who forgave you, and the Christ who can empower you to forgive others. Those keys are within reach. Release yourself. Release others.